Okay, so here we go. This episode is going to be a little bit different than what I have done in the past. This one's going to be more of a story tale. I'm going to try to spin out to you a story. It goes way back to my really high school days. Back 1964, I believe, would be the year. And this story is going to take place in and around my hometown, which is Elizabethton, Tennessee, up in the Smoky Mountains, far eastern end of Tennessee, up in the little tip that adjoins Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky. All that's, right there together. This background I have behind me is really going to be the scene of this little tale that I'm going to spin out to you. This is a 100% true story. Now, almost 60 years have probably clouded my memory a little bit, but the main details of the story remain pretty well burned in, and I'm not likely to forget those probably till my dying day, hopefully. This mountain behind me is Holston Mountain. This is a view taken really more towards the Virginia side of that mountain. It's taken off of South Holston Lake. My hometown, Elizabethton, is actually on the other side of the mountain from where this view was taken. Unfortunately, this is the only picture I could find of the mountain, and this picture was taken, I think, in the wintertime, so there's a little bit of frost on the trees. You kind of see a little white appearance on the mountain. This mountain is a massive mountain. I'm going to show you a little bit more of a terrain map here in a minute. But I would guess that mountain is probably maybe 30 miles long, which is the horizontal dimension we're looking at here, because we're kind of looking at the side of the mountain. And then across the mountain, it's probably a good 10, maybe 15 miles across. Not a particularly tall mountain as mountains go, although the local relief is pretty significant because, terrain down in the valleys is fairly much sea level or a little bit above. Top of the mountain is about 4,200 feet. And we're going to be on that mountain for most of this little story. So let me introduce the cast of characters. It's kind of important to frame this thing up so you know who I'm talking about. First off, there's me. And that picture obviously goes quite a ways back. Let me get myself out of the way a little bit here. That's taken out of my high school yearbook. I was able to find that online. I think my appearance has changed quite a bit since then. Yeah, I had what was called at the time a flat top haircut. They would kind of skin you up the side and then level the top off, and then you use this stick or sort of a gel, came in a stick form. You put that in your hair and brush it back, and it would make it stand up. So that was kind of the flat top. I was looking back at the credits I got down there. Interestingly enough, I see one in there. It was called Football Photographer. And that kind of goes back to the earliest part of my photography experience, because I did the photography for the football games. And mostly that was video, or well, back then it was film. But that was basically taking videos of the ball games so that the team and the coach, could review a particular game and, kind of learn from that going forward. The next person, as far as a cast of characters, was a friend of mine at the time, very close friend at the time, David McKinney. He's a little bit younger than I am. Um, you can see he also kind of had that flat top haircut. He had pretty light hair, kind of a ladies' man, kind of a guy. He went on to graduate from the University of Tennessee, and I think he got a degree in forestry. Last I knew of him, he was working for the state as a game warden because he was also kind of an outdoor guy. And the third character in this cast, unfortunately, I couldn't find a young picture of Mark, but this is Mark Basher. He's deceased, unfortunately, but Mark looked a lot like that in his younger days. He didn't wear glasses. He didn't have that Groucho Marx type mustache, and his hair was pretty uniformly dark. But he had kind of that long, narrow face. It's actually a very good likeness of him. His appearance didn't change all that much over the years. Now let me throw another thing in here too. I don't know whether it's pertinent or not, but we all had nicknames back in that era. There was about 8 or 10 of us that hung together in a group, all real close friends, and for whatever reasons, we all acquired nicknames. And Mark's nickname was the Bast. You don't have to think too long to figure out how that might have come about, given his name was Mark Basher. But he was the Bast, and I'll probably refer to him as that as I go forward in the real story once we get into that. Then coming back to David, he was known as the Voon, V-O-O-N. So anytime you said Voon, you were talking about David. And then coming back to me, I was kind of the studious type in high school. So my nickname was the Fess, or the Fessin Man, I guess professor, whatever, I don't know. But that's what it was. So anyway, let me kind of move forward here. Oh, there are a couple other objects that are part of the cast here. A lot of this adventure is going to take place in this car, which was David. Well, this is the best picture I could find of it. It's a 1960 Ford Falcon. And David, or the Voon, had a Falcon. And that's where most of this adventure takes place, around that car. And then also, Mark, the Bast, had a Jeep. And as you will hear in the story, this eventually plays into the story as well. So let me come back, try to get this started. Let's see what the best way to do that is. Let's see, I want myself up in the corner. And I want the map as a background to kind of get things started here. So this is my hometown, Elizabethton, and it is in the corner of Tennessee, as I said before. Mountains all around, and this mass here that you can see, this is Holston Mountain. There's a couple other towns that play into this story, because we're going to be in those towns as we go through the story. Johnson City, which is about 6 miles from Elizabethton. Where is Johnson City? Where is Johnson City? Oh, there's Johnson City. Okay, so there's Elizabeth and there's Johnson City. About 6 miles apart, something like that. And then we got another town that's going to play into the story, and that is Bristol, Virginia. Here's Bristol. So as you can see, here's Elizabeth, and we got to go all the way across Holston Mountain if you went as the crow flies to Bristol. And then Bristol to Johnson City is about 30 miles, something like that. So this whole story is going to take place right in this area. Well, anyway, it's spring of the year, probably May, something like that. I don't really remember exactly what. And David and I had been to a banquet of some sort. I think it was probably an athletic banquet because we both ran track. And for whatever reasons, the rest of our buddies weren't around that night. When that banquet was over, David and I were kind of thinking about, well, what are we going to do here? But we were also dressed up. We had dressed, we wore suits, white shirts, as I recall. Both of us had a tie on. Obviously, we had a coat as a top, slacks, and, some kind of semi-dressy shoes, as it was back in that day. It wasn't particularly dressy. And so after that was over, it's probably about 9, maybe no later than 10 o'clock. And we're thinking, well, what are we going to do the rest of the evening? Well, one of our favorite pastimes back in that era, because let me tell you something, Upper East Tennessee in 1964, there was very little to do. I mean, just not much. Nothing like what you have today. The area is very rural, probably backwards by a lot of people's standards. I mean, we're all hillbillies. And so one of our favorite pastimes was to go what we called old roading, or old Roadin, and pronounce the G. And so normally there were 4 or 5 of us. Maybe we do this once a week or once every couple of weeks. Get together with nothing else to do. We'd hop in somebody's car, 'cause we all had cars pretty much in that group. And we would take off and go old roading. Well, the object of old roading was to find a road, either one you'd never been on to see where it went, or one that we knew where it went, and we knew it was going to be a pretty good little adventure. Of course, we were always expecting the unexpected. I don't think we ever went on one of those old roading trips without some expectation that something out of the ordinary was going to happen. So anyway, David and I loaded up in his Falcon I showed you before. We were in his car that night. Still have our suits and stuff on. I think we probably took the coats and ties off, I would guess by then. And we start driving around a little bit around Elizabeth, and we're thinking, well, which direction do we want to go in? Because a lot of different ways you could go to catch different old roads. Well, for whatever reasons that night, we said, well, let's go up on Holston Mountain. That was always a good road. It's the good way go, not a good road necessarily, but it's a good place to go. It's pitch dark. Nice weather though. Spring of the year, probably 75, 80 degrees, something like that. And so we decided to take off and go on one of our favorite roads that went along. You can't see this too well in the picture, but that road skirts the edge of that mountain. It doesn't go along the crest. It kind of goes along the edge of that mountain. It goes a long, long ways. In fact, it goes almost the entire length of that mountain until it comes to a major highway up here on the other end, kind of the north end, and then that major highway goes on over to Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee. So anyway, we're going up the road, and I don't know exactly where this takes place, but we're driving along, and just kind of chatting, and it's pitch dark. There's no moon, a little bit of light, not much, just, headlights of the cars, but all we have is a narrow gravel road, trees on either side, and we're just talking and, enjoying what we're doing. Well, it had been raining a great deal at that time of the year. And of course, the road was gravel, had a pretty good base under it, so we didn't have too much trouble negotiating it. We had a couple of rough spots. Then we got to a section on that road, and we'd driven quite a long ways. I couldn't tell you exactly where we were when we encountered this situation, but there had been quite a bit of road work going on. They had graded the road and widened it, and it was a big sweeping turn that had been freshly graded, but they hadn't put gravel down on it yet. It's just dirt, clay, red clay, Tennessee dirt. And it was pretty well saturated from all the rain. So we're seeing this and we're thinking, well, can we get through it or should we turn back? Well, of course, we were never very much inclined to turn back when we started on one of these expeditions. So we started on through that mud, and we got about halfway through the turn, and the car started spinning out, and all of a sudden we're stuck. And we're sitting there looking at each other. It's like, well, what are we going to do now? So we get out, and immediately our feet are sinking down into that mud. I think we took our shoes off. Pretty sure we took our shoes off at that point. Walk around to the back of the car, walk to the front of the car, kind of looking at the situation. And the car's pretty much sunk down in the mud because we've been spinning the wheels trying to get it to move, and it just digging deeper and deeper and deeper. So we thought, well, maybe we can get the jack out and jack it up and get it out of the rut. So we get the jack out of the car, put it down under the rear bumper, and let me get a picture of that car back up here. See if I can get back to that fairly easily. Yeah, so as you can see, a Falcon is probably not really the ideal off-road vehicle. So it's kind of low to the ground. It's got pretty skinny tires on it, just street tread, so, not much there to work with. As far as traction, a pretty light car, but we got that bumper jack under the rear bumper right there on the left rear corner, on the picture, the right rear corner of the car. We start jacking with that bumper jack, and we're jacking, and the jack's, doing its thing. Well, the car's not moving anywhere. So we look, and the bottom of the jack is pushing its way down into the mud. All it done is push the base of the jack down in the mud. It hadn't moved the car one bit. So we fiddled around with that for a little while longer, and kind of looked at each other and said, well, this is not gonna do it. So we're gonna have to figure out some way to get out of here. We were a long ways from Elizabeth, and probably 10, 15 miles up that road. But we knew that there was a Boy Scout camp further up, probably another 4 or 5 miles. I don't know exactly how far it was. We had nothing with us, no flashlight. We had zero preparation for the situation we were in. So we lock up the car. I don't even think we had a book of matches. I'm not sure. We didn't have any light, I know that. You could barely see the road cut. Might have been a little bit of moonlight, I'm not sure. There's just enough light that you could see kind of the road cut and kind of see the road, the direction that it went. It was down in the trees, so you kind of see the tree line on either side. So we started walking, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked. Well, but then we decided to put our shoes back on at least. We didn't, oh yeah, we had taken our pants off. We were holding our pants, because we were getting in the mud so bad. We'd taken our pants off, so we were holding our pants. And we put our shoes back on. And so we're walking on the gravel because I think once we got out of the mud, we decided it wasn't very good walking barefoot in the gravel. So we put our shoes back on. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden we start hearing this noise off in the distance. A barking noise. And you could hear it. The further we walked, the louder that barking got. And what we came to realize was that there was a pack of wild dogs off in the woods on either side of us. And the more we walked, the louder they got. And you could hear them running through the woods, and they'd bark on one side, and then they'd bark on the other side. And we're kind of looking at each other as like, well, what the heck now? It was so dark that you couldn't see the road or the roadside adequately. We were trying to find a stick or a big rock or anything to, possibly defend ourselves if those dogs did come up close by. You couldn't see enough to even find anything. So we kind of hugged each other. We're walking along the road, hugging each other as close as we could get to each other. And we just kept walking and walking and walking. And we discovered eventually that the barking was getting fainter and fainter and fainter. So somehow we got lucky on that. Because the dogs didn't attack us. And I will have to tell you, that's probably one of the scaredest moments that I ever had in my life, because I thought we were going to get eaten by wild dogs. But we didn't, and we kept on walking and kept on walking, and we finally got to the crest of a little hill, and they had parked some of the road machines there on the crest of that hill. And we got up, I remember getting up on this, it was a great big road grader thing, and we were both up there on it. We were trying to figure out if there's some way to start that thing and drive that thing down the road. Now, that would have been a heck of a deal if we'd done it, but we couldn't figure out how to start it. The controls were locked up or whatever, and couldn't figure out how to start it, so we gave up on that pretty quick. We kept on walking. And we knew we were eventually going to get to the Boy Scout camp, Camp Tom Howard. And finally we did. And we get there, it's late night, of course, probably midnight or maybe later by then. And we're kind of looking, we'd been to that camp before in daylight. I knew a little bit about it. And so we found this cabin where the scoutmasters, older guys, were. They're about our age, actually. And so we started talking to the scoutmasters. They had been playing cards. There's several of them there. And we walked in, because we're covered with red clay mud from head to toe. I have no idea what we looked like, but it couldn't have been good. And so we walk in there, and we tell them our predicament, that we're, mired up in the mud several miles back down the road, trying to figure out how to get out of there, how to get the car out of there, how to get home. And so they're talking amongst themselves, and one of them had a car, but he claimed he didn't have enough gas. And so they declined being able to help us, but they said, hey, maybe you can walk on down from here to the highway and hitch a ride. And now that highway was the highway that goes to Bristol, which is actually taking us much further away from home, Elizabethton, if you will. But at least it's getting us somewhere. So let me come back to that map. Yeah. So we make our way, and we are, where are we? We are somewhere up in here. Camp Tom Howard is somewhere up in here. And that Highway 421 goes across the mountain and on over to Bristol. So we make our way down to the highway, and now we're walking along a nice paved highway. I think we put our pants back on by then. We must have put them back on when we were at the Boy Scout camp. So we're walking along, waiting for a ride. And this is like late at night. Nobody ever is on 421 at that time of the night, hardly. So we walk and we walk and we walk. And finally, we see some lights coming towards us, heading in the direction that we're trying to go. And so we flag this car down. Well, it turns out it's those scoutmasters. And they had felt so sorry for us that they figured out somehow to get some gas and come and pick us up. So they picked us up, took us to Bristol, which is probably about another, probably 10 miles on to Bristol. And they drop us off at the bus station in Bristol. And here we are, a few people in the bus station, not too many. We go in the bathroom to kind of see what we look like, maybe clean up a little bit. We go in there and we're looking in the mirror and it's like, man, we were covered with that red clay mud. We had white shirts on. They were all covered with big spots of red clay. Our shoes had red clay down in them. Pants had red clay all over them. So we cleaned off with paper towel, wet towels and stuff as best we could and kind of at least got it off our faces where we didn't look so awful. Fortunately, and we never had any money back in that era, but fortunately, for some reason, we did have enough money to buy a bus ticket. It wasn't very expensive back in that era. Maybe, I don't know, $2 or $3 for a bus ticket from Bristol to Johnson City. You couldn't get a bus to Elizabeth and to where we really were trying to get to. But we had figured out, David and I had figured out, that our buddy Mark, or the Bast, was working in Johnson City because he worked a night shift at the hospital. He was an orderly or something there in the emergency room. And he was working there that night. And now, bear in mind, this long before cell phones, anything like that. So we had no real way to communicate with anybody. But we just took a chance, and took the bus on in Johnson City because we knew that at least what would get us closer to home, Johnson City being 6 miles from Elizabeth. And so take that bus, and we get to the hospital there in Johnson City, and Mark's there, and we tell him our predicament. It's like, we're mired up in the mud up on Holston Mountain. We'd like to get that Jeep out of there, or that Falcon out of there at some point. What about going up there with your Jeep and let's try to pull that thing out? So he was all good with that. I mean, Mark was a real friendly, helpful guy, one of our best friends. And so he said, well, I don't get off my shift until 6. It's sometime in the middle of the night when we're there. He says, you guys, not much of any place for you to stay here, but I'll tell you what I'll do. Let me get one of these gurneys, which is kind of like a narrow bed on wheels, tall, narrow bed on wheels, if you've never seen a gurney. They're just about wide enough for one person to lay on, but there was 2 of us. So he gets that gurney, and David and I get on that gurney, and the only way that both of us could get on it was to lay there back to back. And so that's what we do. We're laying there back to back on that gurney. He rolls us into this room, storage room of some kind. And so we actually sleep a little bit there on that gurney. It's a miracle we hadn't, fallen asleep and rolled off that thing, but neither one of us did. Well, we woke up the next morning, and there we were. Well, we were in a room with dead bodies, as it turns out. That was kind of a shocker. So get up, go on out, and I guess Mark had woken us up. He was ready to get it off his shift. So he's got his Jeep out in the parking lot. Let me get that Jeep back on here. So his Jeep's out in the parking lot, and we all load up in that Jeep. As you can see, that Jeep, and this is not the actual Jeep, but it's very similar to the one he had. You know, he didn't have any top on it, just completely open, pretty basic Jeep. I think he had a chain or something in it, or we stopped and got a chain, I'm not sure. So we make our way from Johnson City to Elizabethton, and then we head on up that same road on Holston Mountain to retrieve the Falcon. And so we drive on up there, and sure enough, Falcon's still sitting there in the mud, all mired up and everything. We hooked the Jeep up to it, and sure enough, we're able to pull it out. We got it straightened out, got it out of the mud and back onto the gravel. So, you know, we were okay once we got it on the gravel because it had traction. And so we got everything all squared away, and we start back to Elizabethton. Well, not long after we had rescued the Falcon, it started pouring the rain. I mean, just absolutely pouring the rain. Well, here's poor old Mark. He's sitting in his Jeep, you know, with no top. David and Devon and I are sitting in the Falcon. Of course, it's pouring the rain. We're not getting wet. Well, poor old Mark, he's sitting there. I mean, he's looking like a drowned rat in that Jeep because he's driving along right in front of us. And it just poured. I mean, there was water overflowing the floorboard of that Jeep. There was so much coming down. So anyway, we get on back into town, and it's about I guess it's about daylight. Yeah, it might be a little after daylight by then. I hadn't been home all night. Had no way to tell my parents where I was. Guess I could have found a payphone somewhere when we were in Bristol, but I didn't. And so we go walking up to my front door, walk in the house. Here we are. David and I are still, David's with me, and Mark's still with us. He's all looking like a drowned rat. David's all covered with mud. I'm all covered with mud. Here's some noise back in the back. Well, my dad is standing there in front of the bathroom sink shaving. And I walk in there looking like this, and he's looking at me and said, and my mother, all of a sudden, she pops up and said, "Where have you boys been all night?" So I proceeded to tell her the story. It was pretty funny. But anyway, that's a true story. Don't know if it bored you with it or not, but it certainly causes me to recall a lot of things that took place back in the day. I mean, it's almost 60 years ago. And one thing I want to recap before I finish here, because it dawned on me after I was doing the research for this little storytelling. This guy, Mark Basher, the guy I was referring to, the guy with the Jeep, he's the guy that got me into photography. I owe a lot to him. I never saw him after I left Tennessee, never had any communications with him at all. It's very unfortunate. We were very close friends in high school. He got me into photography. His father was a chemist and had a dark room, and Mark picked up on that. He had me up at his house one day, and we were playing around with that dark room, and it sparked my interest to the point where I set up my own dark room, started getting into photography, and I've kind of been with it ever since. Now, of course, things have gone digital, but that was probably the most influential person in my life as far as getting me into the hobby that I love the most. All right, guys, that's kind of it for the day. Let me fade this out, and I'm done.